Hallucinogens-Inspired Christmas. Understanding different types of hallucinogens, the effects psychedelics have on the brain, and Old Saint Nick himself. Types of hallucinogens. Before we dive into the main point of this article, I'd like to talk about psychedelics and hallucinogens. Like squares and rectangles, all psychedelics are hallucinogens, but not all hallucinogens are psychedelics. The primary difference being that hallucinogens are a broader and more diverse group of psychoactive drugs that produce an altered state of consciousness, whereas psychedelics belong to a subclass of hallucinogenic drugs that produce the apparent expansion of consciousness. Both drugs are psychoactive, definition affecting the mind or behavior, and make major alterations including thought, mood, and perception. Other examples of hallucinogens are deliriants and dissociative drugs. LACNA 2023. There is also an illustrative and informative article by Cleveland Clinic on hallucinogens that breaks it into a more understandable form. If my writing doesn't break it down into digestible enough pieces, that article is a perfect place to start your own research if need be. Cleveland Clinic 2023 in the references section. Examples of each would be psilocybin, LSD, DMT, mescaline, and N-bombs for psychedelic, ketamine, and PCP for dissociative, National Institute on Drug Abuse 2023, datura, brugmansia, and even dramamine and Benadryl for deliriants. One of the major differences between deliriants and psychedelics is that deliriants produce hallucinations that fall in line with daily life. Psychedelics usually provide levels up to one big out of this world extreme hallucination. Delirium's main mode of production is not through serotonin receptors like psychedelics, rather, deliriums affect the neurotransmitter acetylcholine working against those receptors. Decreasing acetylcholine levels leads to tachycardia, sedation, and delirium, including realistic hallucinations. Both cannabis and caffeine hinder the enzyme acetylcholinesterase, which I definitely said wrong, which breaks down acetylcholine. This means those that use the drugs concurrently, definition at the same time, with caffeine or cannabis end up raising their levels of acetylcholine and improving cognitive function and limiting the effects of deliriums. Friedman, 2022. Dissociative drugs, on the other hand, block the action of N-methyl D-aspartate, NMDA, receptors, which are responsible for transporting glutamate. These drugs can alter perception, but they typically make people feel disconnected from their body and environment as well. Effects can vary widely, but often these drugs temporarily disrupt thought patterns, mood, and perception, as well as leading to feeling detached or floating away from the body. People can face adverse side effects like headaches, nausea, or changes in heart rate, though usually non fatal. However, illicitly processed or manufactured drugs may be laced with fentanyl, which is odorless and colorless, or other dangerous substances which can lead to overdose and or death. Sometimes these drugs can also produce debilitating definition of a disease or condition, making someone very weak and infirm, anxiety, or fear. These drugs can lead to dangerous behavior and injury, especially if there is not another individual present to help prevent or respond to emergency situations. Evidence and research has shown that most fatal overdoses are in correlation with very high doses, using a combination of drugs, particularly combination with alcohol, or being placed in excessive physical restraints while displaying behaviors that would harm themselves or others. While more study to understand the effects and causes is needed, there are things people can actively do to prepare themselves to face emergencies. National Institute on Drug Abuse 2023. Psychedelics affect the brain. The first article I will use regards hallucinogens and entactogens. For that purpose, I will describe entactogens here. These are psychoactive substances that produce social and emotional effects. Originally, the term coined was empathogen, but David E. Nichols called them entactogens to avoid the improper association with the Greek root word pathos, meaning suffering. The term entactogen means touching within, entactogen, no date. These drugs promote emotional openness, empathy, a sense of connectivity, a state of well-being, belonging, feelings of love, and calmness. The targets of these drugs are serotonin transporters, norepinephrine transporters, dopamine transporters, and serotonin receptors. Items falling under this class include methylene dioxyphenolphthaleamines, I probably said that wrong, MDXX, apart from certain non-entactogens like MDPV, MDMA, which is ecstasy, MBDB, methylone, benzofurans 5 and 6 APB, 5 and 6 MAPB, and the A-alkyltryptamine AET, among others. A for alpha. Most entactogens are amphetamines, some are tryptamines. These drugs act as serotonin releasing agents. Side effects include mydriasis, pupil dilation, nystagmus, involuntary eye movement, jaw cleansing, bruxism, excessive teeth grinding, insomnia, loss of appetite, tachycardia, fast resting heart rate, hypertension, hyperthermia, and more. Severe effects include dehydration, hyperthermia, seizures, rhabdomyolysis, or rhabdo, which is damage to the muscles causing rapid breakdown, dark/brown colored urine, and sometimes kidney failure with delayed treatment. Hypotremia, low sodium, AKI/ARF, acute kidney injury or acute renal failure, decreased kidney function, liver injury, serotonin syndrome, and valvular heart disease. An estimated fatal dose of MDMA is only about 15 to 16 times a recreational dose. In comparison, LSD and psilocybin lethal doses are 1,000 times and 200 times the recreational dose, respectively. Definition separately or individually in the order already mentioned. MDMA also has the potential to interact with many other drugs and poses higher risks of severe and potentially fatal side effects. Wikipedia Contributors 2026. There is a point I'm attempting to drive home here that may not be clearer until farther in. Just bear with me. Main functions altered by hallucinogens are psychotic like symptoms, changes in mood, perception of time, self, and environment. This can include both pleasant and threatening experiences with derealization and depersonalization. Both psilocybin and ketamine either produce loss of ego boundaries associated with positive emotions or negative ego disintegration associated with thought disorder, loss of autonomy, and loss of self control. This graph that just passed us was depicting the experiences of healthy volunteers under the influence of psilocybin, esketamine, and MDMA. Vollenweider, 2001. I won't pretend to understand the statistics because I know there are many ways that studies can be flawed in application to a broader number of topics. What I am saying is not that every single study is flawed or inherently wrong in the immediate second that a scientist posts it to a public forum. Rather, what I am saying is that there is no single study, or for this purpose, no single graph that will tell the entire story. There's too much nuance in the way that we all experience things that which the information we gather isn't able to be applied much broader than the groups we've studied. Maybe this is an ignorant point of view, and I won't make a claim against that. I understand that my worldview of interacting with math and science has been particularly limited, but I've also found that the emotional aspects and social aspects are disregarded too often. There's a middle ground here somewhere, one where we can see the positives of both regulation and exploration, at least I hope. The study goes on to note that comparatively prodromal, early, and acute schizophrenic patients have faced perceptual disturbances and heightened sensitivity regarding auditory and visual hallucinations under ketamine and psilocybin. Furthermore, the evidence, as the author suggests, points to the useful models in understanding the pathophysiology, the study of functional changes in the body caused by disease or injury, and the development and understanding of how normal physiological processes become disrupted of schizophrenia. Though, despite similarities between models and psychoses, major differences have been noted even in limited human studies. Ketamine produced more anxiety, thought disturbance, and ego disintegration than psilocybin, and ketamine also produced transient, definition lasting only for a short time, impermanent apathy, emotional withdrawal, and feelings of indifference, resembling the negative effects of schizophrenia closely. Finding is consistent with the view that ketamine and PCP induce thought disturbances and cognitive impairment in healthy subjects mimicking those seen in schizophrenia patients. Both face considerable offsets in working memory, attention, abstract reasoning, decision making, and planning. Vollenweider, 2001. Medical jargon continues for quite some time before coming to the conclusion section, at which point the author goes on to say that similar alterations are made by serotonergic definition, anything that involves, activates, or is influenced by serotonin in the transmission of nerve impulses, hallucinogens, and NMDA antagonist, ketamine. Although they have different points of action, also the same systems appear abnormally in those with early or initial stages of naturally occurring psychoses, which is believed to be a new way in which to examine the development of schizophrenia and other such psychoses. The data also indicates that excessive serotonin activation is not sufficient in producing psychosis. Vollenweider, 2001. Another article I found dives more into the potential therapeutic effects of psychedelic drugs like psilocybin. A single dose under controlled conditions shows promise in relieving mental symptoms of depression. The therapeutic effects can also last much longer than the effects of the drug. However, it is uncertain how these drugs affect the brain, leading to the therapeutic result. 7 healthy young adults participated in a study at Washington University in St. Louis in which the brain's activity under the use of psilocybin was tracked. Regular sessions of fMRI scans occurred before, during, and after a controlled dose of psilocybin were administered. Major changes in functional connectivity were viewed. This is how the correlation between activity in different regions of the brain is measured. Regions included most of the cerebral cortex, thalamus, hippocampus, and cerebellum. The largest changes were observed in the default mode network, most active when we are not focused on a particular task. This area is believed to govern our sense of space, time, and self. Another interesting piece was that when the participants were asked to focus on a task of matching spoken words to images, the psilocybin associated functional connectivity changes were reduced. Most brain activity returned to normal within days of dosing, but a reduction in the connectivity lasted for at least 3 days. This could help understand why lasting changes in perception of self were made under this drug. This research helps us understand a little bit more closely the effects on brain function and perception of self from psychedelics. Completely desynchronizing the part of your brain that is fundamental in the ability to conceptualize the self in relation to the world is insanely intriguing. Researchers caution strongly against the use of psilocybin without supervision of trained mental health experts, as self medicating can lead to serious risks. Still, the information gathered in this research allows scientists to begin understanding how to develop the therapeutic potential of psychedelics. Doctorow 2024. While reckless use of drugs can always lead to adverse side effects, the research and understanding the things done to our minds under certain drugs is profound. Our development as a society, our understanding of society, perceptions of self, etc., all develop widely upon the things we choose to devote our time to. Alright, guys, we finally made it. Here is how hallucinogens inspired Christmas. Deliriants are seen across history in tons of stories, including European mythology. Plants like henbane, belladonna, mandrake, Jimson weed, and fly agaric mushrooms. In Greek mythology, henbane leaves were used in wreaths placed on the crown of the recently deceased to allow them to forget their past lives on the way to the underworld. Mandrake is seen in stories of the gallows. Henbane was used in magic during the Greco-Roman era and during the late Middle Ages in association with black magic. Henbane was also used in love potions in the Middle Ages with Scopalia cardiolica. I definitely said that wrong. Henbane bell being found in Central Europe. Datura, which is still used in Latin American shamanism, has been used by indigenous persons in Mexico, South America, and southwestern United States for hundreds of years for rituals and sacred purposes. Brugmansia is sometimes added to ayahuasca by dishonest shamans to take advantage of tourists. Belladonna has long been associated with witchcraft. Wolfsbane also has ties to witchcraft in European mythology. Some believe this to be where the idea of werewolves came from, as wolfsbane can cause paresthesia, which makes the user feel as though they're covered in fur. Acontium wolfsbane is also used in Greek mythology when Athena used it to turn Arachne into a spider. Friedman, 2022. I'm getting at by including that excerpt is that throughout history, humans have used and told stories of the use of hallucinogens. Some of those even inspired folk stories and perhaps incited panic through lack of understanding and fear brought through delirium. I also added it because the author included fly agaric mushrooms on that list, which are also known as Amanita muscaria, and probably the most widely known or at least visually recognized of all mushrooms. I selected a few articles that seem like they would best explain this phenomenon, and I will start with 8 ways magic mushrooms explain Santa's story. Arctic shamans doled out mushrooms during winter solstice. Shaman or priests connected to older traditions would collect Amanita muscaria, the holy mushroom, and dry them. They would then give them as gifts at the winter solstice. Snow would usually block the doors, and there was an opening in the roof through which people would enter and exit, potentially developing the chimney story. Number 2, mushrooms are found beneath pine trees. Many historians and ethnomycologists agree that symbolically this is at least one tie between the iconography definition, the visual images and symbols used in a work of art, or the study or interpretation of these, of Christmas. Author of Mushrooms and Mankind, James Arthur believes that this explains the idea of placing bright red and white gifts under the tree to look like the mushrooms, as well as the concept of bringing pine trees into the home. Number 3, reindeer were spirit animals to the shaman. In Siberia and Northern Europe, reindeer are common and also seek out hallucinogenic fungi like their human counterparts. Harvard University biologist Donald Pfister suggests that shamans who ingested fly agaric mushrooms might have hallucinated that the reindeer who were nearby were flying. Though Pfister says that the connection between Christmas and the ancestral practice of consuming mushrooms is a coincidence, and he is not certain of a direct link. Number 4, shamans dressed like Santa Claus. The shamans had a tradition of dressing up like the mushrooms in red suits with white spots. Number 5, mushrooms are common in depictions of Christmas. Ornaments are shaped like amanita mushrooms, with other depictions of fly agaric mushrooms prevalent in Scandinavia and Northern Europe. Debate about the consumption of mushrooms by Arctic and Siberian people and shamans is not particularly debated, though the connection to traditions is a little bit more elusive. Number 6, Rudolph's nose, bright red, resembles the mushroom. Maybe a little bit of a stretch, but you know. Number 7, A Visit from St. Nicholas may have borrowed from shaman rituals. The poem from 1823, which later became 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, has origins that are unclear, though many believe he drew from Northern European motifs. At a minimum, Santa's sleigh and reindeer are most likely references from Northern European mythology. One example being the Norse god Thor, who was known as Donner in German, and whose chariot was drawn by two goats. Number 8, Santa is from the Arctic. Ronald Hutton, historian, says the connection is flawed and that Siberian shamanism doesn't involve sleighs, reindeer spirits, mushroom usage, or red and white clothes. Others disagree, saying that shamans did deal with reindeers and that the ingestion of mushrooms is well documented. Siberian shamans wore red deer pelts, but the color of Santa's outfit is meant to mirror the mushrooms. Some people would drink the urine of the shaman or reindeer due to the lack of harmful chemicals present and the hallucinogenic compounds intact. What other reason is there for Santa to live in the North Pole? These traditions can be traced back to Siberia, Maine 2013. Other articles seem to support most of this information by repeating it or some form in different phrasing. One of the interesting pieces found in The Strange Psychedelic History of Christmas states that one of the most reported effects of eating or smoking fly agaric mushrooms are Gulliverian and Lilliputian hallucinations, both named after the book Gulliver's Travels, which follows the story of a tourist as he encounters little people known as the Lilliputians. The hallucinations give the illusion of shrinking and growing, which could be correlated to the resizing effects within Alice and Mario's stories. Amanita muscaria does not contain any psilocybin, rather a mix of psychoactive compounds including muscimol and bufotenine, probably said those wrong, which is also secreted by desert toads. Other compounds in the mushroom are neurotoxic in high doses such as ibotenic acid. Using fly agaric mushrooms may induce dreamlike or sedative sensations, agitation, confusion, dizziness, auditory and visual perceptual changes, which are different to hallucinations in that this affects the perceived sensory information, like seeing one thing as something else, and distortion of time and space. While rare, it is not unheard of for users to die from ingesting these mushrooms. One man went into a 5-day paranoid psychosis, and another slipped into a coma after eating half a kilo, about 1.1 pounds. Mycologists consider fly agaric mushrooms to be toxic, though there are supposedly ways to detoxify them for safe consumption, albeit a way that makes me squeamish. One is detailed previously in number 8. People have long used fly agaric mushrooms for spiritual purposes, and they are speculated to be the oldest hallucinogen in the world. Fly agaric mushrooms are mycorrhizal, definition, a fungus which grows in association with the roots of a plant in a symbiotic or mildly pathogenic relationship, so they are primarily found beneath trees. Vera 2022. Most often found near pine, birch, spruce, fir, oak, and cedar. Interestingly, A. muscaria shows little host specificity, meaning when its preferred host is absent in a habitat, it will readily pair with other species. The Sami people from Lapland, northern Finland, not far from the North Pole, have centered both reindeer and fly agaric mushrooms in their culture, which ends up building the case of Santa taking a true trip across the world. The issue is that shamanism in Siberia was all but obsolete due to the Soviet Union banning the religion and assassinating many who practiced it. The Sami people also faced colonization from Finland, which dramatically declined their reindeer herding. We cannot determine how definitive or how much of the truth these stories and theories hold, but writing them off can be dismissive as well. Ultimately, this is someone's entire history and culture and not to be taken so lightly or brushed off. Christmas, while involving Christ in the title, isn't traditionally built around him. Not that you shouldn't celebrate the holiday as you please, but if instead we try to remember that our traditions come from the amalgamation, definition, the action, process, or result of combining or uniting of different cultures, religions, and perspectives, you might find that we connect in ways we wouldn't have imagined. We've always found ways to bring warmth into our homes to survive the harshness of winter. Henry, 2022. He figured out by now that the main point I was getting at was to have empathy and that making drugs legal makes them safer and less likely for people to overdose or face adverse effects. You were right. Throughout history, we have found ways to alter our state of mind. Whether we did that to try to understand religion, the world, or just ourselves doesn't particularly matter. What I see when I read these articles is how connected we all are, even without our knowledge or explicit consent. Definition, permission for something to happen, or agreement to do something. When I read that ketamine caused some people to experience similar effects to schizophrenia, it encouraged me to want to put more research into helping those people. If the closest you get to understanding someone is experiencing adverse effects from a bad trip, that's both sad and enlightening. There's a long way for us to go still, but sometimes when I spend time thinking, I see that we're getting closer to changing the right pieces. If all you do today is take 5 minutes to think, let it be to your growth and to the world's betterment. Thank you for sticking around. If you're a fan of investigative journalism and philosophy, subscribe for free today. If you would like to further support my efforts, you can subscribe to my Patreon, which will be linked in the description. Only occasional posts are for purchase, everything else is free, and it comes 2 days earlier than any other platform. It also helps me cover research materials, i.e., purchasing texts, as well as my time and effort in development. Along with that, it supports my real life effort in making education free and widespread. I thank you for your support, no matter the form. All my references will be in the Substack and Patreon links in the description, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye!